And now, the story behind the engine that scared an entire sport into silence begins. What if I told you Ford once built a racing engine so powerful, NASCAR had no choice but to erase it from history? February 14, 1965, the Daytona 500 roared to life under cloudy Florida skies, but by lap 50, something didn't feel right. Not to the spectators, not to the racers, and especially not to the officials, because Mario Andretti, behind the wheel of a Holman Moody Ford Galaxy, powered by the new 427 SOHC Cammer engine, wasn't just winning, he was annihilating the field. His Galaxy shot down the straights like a missile, tearing past cars like they were idling. By the time the checkered flag waved, he wasn't just ahead, he was practically in another race altogether. Lapping seasoned competitors, the Cammer made 1965's Daytona 500 look more like an exhibition of mechanical dominance than fair competition. The 427 Cammer wasn't just a new engine. It was Ford's weapon of retaliation after years of frustration during the muscle car wars. Detroit's top brass had a mandate: win on Sunday, sell on Monday. But when your rivals keep stealing the spotlight, you do more than compete. You obliterate. That's exactly what the Cammer was built for. But that kind of power comes at a cost. The moment Andretti crossed that finish line, Ford didn't just win a race. They shattered NASCAR's illusion of parity. Panic spread behind closed doors. Chrysler executives weren't impressed. They were alarmed. And NASCAR, they were already scribbling ideas for new rules. Imagine being so good, so far ahead of your time, that instead of applause, you get erased. That's the story of the 427 SOHC. Not a defeat, but a silencing. Not a loss, but a ban. Welcome to the forbidden saga of Ford's most powerful engine, the Cammer that made history and then vanished from it. Let's find out why they had no choice but to bury it. To understand why the 427 Cammer was feared, you have to go back to the early 60s, a time when Ford was losing face on the racetrack. Chrysler's 426H EMI had become a nightmare for Ford engineers. Beat them or be forgotten became the whispered motto in Dearborn's back halls. Enter Jacques Pacino, Ford's racing director, a man not interested in parity, but in obliteration. While most American V8s were still using pushrod designs, Ford did something radical. They looked across the Atlantic, toward Europe's overhead camshaft technology. This wasn't just innovation, it was defiance. Ford fused European elegance with Detroit brute force. The result? A 427 cubic inch monster with single overhead cams, 2.25-inch intake valves, and a timing chain over 6 feet long, borrowed straight from Formula One thinking. On the dyno, the numbers were absurd. The Cammer pushed out 616 horsepower in its detuned street trim. In racing form, it flirted with 750 and sometimes over 800 horsepower. Reliable, clean power that didn't self-destruct under pressure. More crucially, it revved high. While the Hemi ran out of breath past 6,200 RPM, the SOHC kept singing beyond 7,000. This wasn't just an engine, it was a declaration. Ford engineers nicknamed it the Armageddon engine because it wasn't built to race, it was built to end the race. The 427 SOHC outpaced the Hemi on every metric: top-end speed, heat resistance, longevity. It didn't just win drag strips and ovals, it embarrassed rivals. Veteran mechanics said it ran so smoothly, you could balance a coin on the intake while it idled. That kind of performance was unheard of. In short, Ford had created an engine that was too perfect for the world it was born into. A rare V8 racing engine from the 1960s with an overhead cam revolution at its heart. And that frightened everyone. But victory was short-lived, because what came next wasn't a celebration, it was retaliation, the kind you'd expect when a forbidden creation threatens an empire. By mid-1965, Ford's 427 SOHC wasn't just a racing engine, it was a problem, not for Ford, but for everyone else. Out of 40 major races that year, Ford's cars claimed 32 victories, and 28 of those wins were powered by the forbidden fruit, the Cammer. Spectators started noticing something odd. Races didn't feel competitive anymore. Andretti, Yarborough, and others were finishing laps so far ahead. Fans assumed the race had ended early, or there'd been a scoring error. But there was no error, just pure mechanical superiority. The 427 Cammer wasn't just winning, it was humiliating. Richard Petty famously joked it was like bringing a cannon to a knife fight. And when the fastest cars on the track start making everyone else look like amateurs, the outcry isn't just loud, it's organized. Chrysler was furious, GM was rattled, and NASCAR was scared, not of Ford, but of losing control. Behind closed doors, NASCAR held urgent meetings. In July 1965, the term competitive balance was scribbled across internal memos like graffiti. But the real conversations weren't about fairness, they were about containment. The camera wasn't just warping the sport, it was revealing its limits. It threatened the illusion that any team, on any Sunday, could win. With Ford dominating week after week, viewership, loyalty, and sponsor money began to wobble. That same summer, the first signs of sabotage began to surface. Competitor teams refused to race if cameras showed up. Track organizers hinted at safety concerns. In reality, everyone knew Ford had gone too far. Not because they broke the rules, but because they bent them with such brilliance. The rules had to be rewritten just to stop them. The camera's dominance wasn't welcomed, it was punished. NASCAR wasn't defending racing, they were defending a status quo, one that Ford had cracked wide open with nothing more than timing chains and camshafts. This wasn't a fair playing field collapsing, it was a political one, reasserting control. August 1965, the sabotage was no longer hidden in whispers, it was codified in ink. NASCAR quietly amended its rules. Starting in 1966, overhead camshaft engines were banned. No hearings, no technical rationale, just a blanket statement citing cost control and authenticity. But everyone in the garage knew what it really meant: kill the camera and restore order. Behind this decision was more than just racing politics. Ford wasn't just irritating rivals, it was irritating the government. With the Mustang catching fire in the consumer market, Ford leaned into marketing the camera's raw power. That brought congressional scrutiny. Headlines like "Detroit's death engines" began circulating. Lawmakers accused Ford of selling track-built performance to American teenagers. It wasn't long before IRS audits hit the racing division, reclassifying motorsports spending as entertainment rather than R&D. That single accounting change gutted budgets overnight. Meanwhile, journalists who tried to cover the camera's brilliance found their credentials revoked. NASCAR rewrote historical records, omitting SOHC wins from official press releases. Photographers who snapped pictures of camera engines found their media passes canceled. Even internal Ford memos were sanitized. Engineers were told not to speak to the press. Executives were instructed to never mention the SOHC in public again. What had begun as a celebration of American innovation had now become a political liability. Ford had built an overhead cam muscle engine that rewrote the rules. Instead of embracing it, the system rejected it like a virus. And the irony? The camera was safe, reliable, even cleaner than many of its contemporaries. But in the world of racing politics, that didn't matter. They weren't banning an engine, they were burying a revolution, one that could have changed the trajectory of Detroit engineering forever. But legends don't die quietly, and despite every effort to erase it, the camera refused to be forgotten. Even after the ban, even after the records were sanitized and the photos disappeared, the Ford 427 camera refused to vanish. It simply went underground, into private garages, outlaw drag strips, and whispered stories shared by engine builders who knew what they had seen. Because once you hear the high RPM scream of a camera at full throttle, you don't forget it. Not ever. In the years that followed, collectors began treating surviving cameras like artifacts from a lost civilization. One engine, just the block and heads, sold for $485,000 at auction. Not a car, not a race winner, just the heart of the legend. That price tag wasn't for aluminum and steel, it was for forbidden brilliance. Street racers and drag strip rebels kept the SOHC alive. Some even modified them, pushing past 1,000 horsepower on nitro. Others displayed them in glass cases like sacred relics. And every time a gearhead tuned one, they rediscovered just how far ahead Ford's engineers had been. It wasn't just the power, it was the elegance. Dual timing chains, massive valves, near-perfect combustion efficiency. This wasn't an experiment, it was an apex. You can still see its DNA today, in Ford's Coyote 5.8s, in the twin-turbo EcoBoosts, even in NASCAR engines that, ironically, borrow OHC tech the camera was punished for. The 427 SOHC proved that Americans could build engines with the finesse of Europe and the brute force of Detroit in one package. And those who drove it never forgot. Mario Andretti once said, "It was the greatest American racing engine ever built." Cale Yarborough called it 20, maybe 30 years ahead of its time. These weren't just quotes, they were confessions from men who knew they'd tasted something no rulebook could replicate. Because the camera wasn't just fast, it was flawless, and for that reason alone, it had to be stopped. But the story wasn't over yet, because the engine's ghost still lingers. Every time a classic Ford purrs down a highway, every time an old mechanic tells a story with a gleam in his eye, the camera breathes again. What happened to the Ford 427 SOHC isn't just a story about racing, it's a warning. A high-octane lesson in how power, true, undeniable power, can threaten institutions that thrive on control. The camera wasn't outlawed because it failed. It was outlawed because it succeeded too perfectly. It didn't break the rules, it rewrote them, and that scared the people who wrote the rule book. Imagine if that technology had been allowed to evolve. Overhead cam engines in American production cars back in the late 1960s. Cleaner combustion, higher efficiency, more durable performance. We could have seen family sedans with 30% better fuel economy by 1975. Emissions cleaner than anything Detroit offered in the 80s. A leap forward in American engine design that could have rivaled the Japanese and Europeans before they ever gained a foothold. Instead, what we got was stagnation. Choked carburetors, underpowered V8s, and lost decades. And it wasn't just the camera. The late 1960s and early 70s were filled with stories like it, of promising engines and automotive breakthroughs erased before they reached the public. The 427 SOHC was just the loudest scream that got silenced. Today, we like to think progress always wins, that the best ideas naturally rise. But the camera reminds us, sometimes the system fights back, sometimes the future shows up too early, and the world isn't ready. So the next time you hear a Ford Mustang growl on the street, listen closer. Beneath that rumble, you might hear the ghost of the camera, roaring for a chance it never got. And if you think this story was shocking, just wait. Because next time, we're uncovering what really killed the 426 Hemi, and whether the EPA was used as a weapon to destroy muscle car supremacy. Subscribe, because the truth under the hood is always louder than the lies they try to hide.